Thank you very much for coming, everybody, to the That Word Chat Word of the Year episode. It's great to see everybody. We've got a big crowd today, and we have a huge panel of guests. For those of you who don't know, we've done this. This is the third year we've done this. Most of you do know that the big dictionaries, the functioning dictionaries, will choose a word of the year that sort of captures the idea of what the last year, 2022, was all about. We've assembled a panel from just about everybody who does that, from all over the world, all over the English-speaking world, to give us their thoughts on the words that define the year. I'm going to start with quick introductions, so then we'll jump right into it. And I'll do this alphabetically. So let's start with Mignon Fogarty, the talent behind Grammar Girl's Quick and Dirty Tips podcast, website, newsletter, social media empire. This year, she did a bracket approach to words of the year. So we're going to ask her how that went. Hi, Mignon.
Hi there.
Good to see you. Then we have a new to the show and new to this episode is Mark Gwynn, senior researcher at the Australian National Dictionary Centre at Australian National University in Canberra, who's currently working on a new edition of the Australian National Dictionary, which we won't ask him about because we don't have time. But hello, Mark, and welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm Mark.
Mark's coming to us from tomorrow. So John Kelly is a senior director of editorial at dictionary.com, where, among other things, he decodes slang, trending words, word histories. Welcome back, John. Are you in Cincinnati nowadays?
I'm just down the road from you, Mark. Thanks
All right.
for coming back. Happy to be here.
And Wendalyn Nichols, I'm going in alphabetical order. So Fiona McPherson, senior editor on the New Words team at Oxford English Dictionary. And Fiona's coming to us from Munich.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here again.
Nice to be here. You hear the German accent. Lynne Murphy is professor of linguistics at the University of Sussex, an American living in Brighton, England. And she's been keeping a close eye on words of the year throughout the world. She also selects annually a British English to American English and American English to British English crossover word of the year. So we'll ask her about that. So hello, Lynne.
Hello.
Let's see, Wendalyn Nichols is publishing manager for Cambridge Dictionaries online at Cambridge University Press, coming to us from New York. Hello, Wendy.
Hi there.
And three more. Wow. Peter Sokolowski, editor-at-large for Merriam-Webster in Springfield, Massachusetts.
Hello, good to be with you.
Peter, good to see you again. Kelly Wright, who's been on the show just a few months ago, postdoctoral research fellow at Virginia Polytechnic. And what's she does the new Among the New Words feature. Are you editor, contributor? What do we call you in terms of the Among the New Words feature for the American Dialect Society?
Co-editor. Hi.
Co-editor. All right, good. And Ben Zimmer, who is our only member of the Five Timers Club, and this is now his sixth appearance on That Word Chat, consummate guest and word nerd in every regard. And he's the new words. Tell me your title. Is it the New Words Guru for American Dialect Society?
Chair of the New Words Committee is my title.
Okay, Chair of the New Words Committee. Okay, thanks very much. Good to see everybody. It's a big list. We hope to hear from all of them and often. And we've got no format to today's show. We're just going to do a discussion and hope that we can say everything that needs to be said in an hour. Let's start with the words of the year. There are 8 of them that that were sort of the main ones chosen, but there's a lot of other ones that people have been talking about, especially American Dialect Society. When they do their discussions, they pick in a whole bunch of categories. They have many nominees. But I think the earliest, we don't have anybody from Collins Dictionary, but was permacrisis, I think, like in summer still, or well, maybe early fall.
Early November, I think.
Early November. Okay,
First, I
I'd
think
have to be fair. Were they the
First
first?
of the
It
big
was
ones.
warm.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard permacrisis. It wasn't the only mention of that, but can anybody speak to that? Anybody want to comment on permacrisis as a
I'll
word
just
of the
say
year?
that I've just started hearing polycrisis as the neologism for this year. So we've gone from one crisis to the next. So apparently polycrisis describes what countries have got to deal with now all the time. So
I haven't heard that one. That's terrific. I love that though.
That sounds
Kelly,
like my
Ben, and-
working life, Mark.
Pardon me? Polycrisis or permacrisis.
Ollie,
maybe we can.
And then
that's what publishers can all relate.
yeah, and then another early entry. Where is it? I didn't write. Oh, there it is. Oh, yeah, that's right. It was one out of left field, almost literally, especially to those in America, was the Cambridge word of the year. So can you tell us about that, Wendy?
Yeah. What we do, because everybody probably remembers that the Cambridge Dictionary started life as, and it still has its core identity as a learner dictionary, right? And the audience is global. And so, and we're pretty huge. And so we have a lot of data to look at every year. And when we're looking at choosing a word of the year, we start with the data. So we want to hit that, like data driven. We want to be, find something that chimes with the zeitgeist, and hopefully can also find something that speaks to us as a bit different as a dictionary. And so what we saw when we went into the data was that 5-letter words had just taken over, right? There was all of the, like the usual ones, the hello, pronunciation, sex, all of those were in their typical spots, but then Homer, and we're going, whoa, wait a minute. And we're looking at word after word after word that that just didn't figure at all. And we're going, okay, we can't ignore this. And then the Homer thing in particular had like 65,000 lookups in one day on May 5th when it was the answer for Wordle. And we're going, ooh, zeitgeist, Wordle, cool, okay. And the difference between British and American English, because this is what drove all the Brits to come to our site going, what is this? This isn't fair. A Homer is like a job that you do in, if you're on, under the cash in hand, like if you need a plumber and you don't want to like pay for it in the usual way, there's words that Homer means, but a home run is not one of them, So we're like, yeah, okay, this is our baby. And it did take a little bit of convincing of our publicity people, because they're going, I don't know, I think the word ship has sailed. But then, Wordle itself was sort of the top searched word kind of on the planet almost. So yeah, that's where it came from. And we just really had a lot of fun with it. We had the campaign was like way more attention in the States than Cambridge usually gets, so that was where it came from.
We're all shocked.
And, yeah. And I can pop in the chat, there's a lot of linguistic information that we dug down, and Lynne Murphy also helped us a lot with that British American thing. So that was really cool. I'll just put that in the chat right there. So you can go look for yourself.
Yeah.
Then after Cambridge did it for their word of the year, I did it for my American to British, or UK to US, US to UK word of the year, for much the same reason. So not only was it being looked up in Cambridge Dictionary throughout the year, people were still referencing it in December on Twitter when they wanted to complain about a tough Wordle. They'd say, this is as bad as Homer. Yeah, so it was a word that really has stuck in the British mindset, the British word book game playing mindset, at least, as a shorthand for a difficult solution. So
that's interesting. And there is another sort of meaning of Homer in American English, which is just, doing something really well. You really hit a homer with
It's
that.
a figurative extension. Yeah.
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 And there are
Yeah,
a lot of baseball terms that have made it to the UK, like, step up to the plate and, first base and things like that. But homer is not one that had made it. And now there's the question of could it? Now that
Right.
people are
Well,
more aware of it.
something to observe. I'm curious about this spike in 5-letter words. I guess that's probably true for other dictionaries too, also, right?
Absolutely true.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask
Yeah.
if the other dictionaries could share some of their top 5-letter word lookups. Like, we're all grateful for the traffic that Wordle gave us this year. Top 5 for us were trice, null, smite, and tacit. So it's interesting.
We
to
had
see-
tacit and null as well. Yeah.
Tacit and null were some
Uh-huh.
biggies. Peter and other dictionaries were some of the top 5-letter lookups in your data.
Well, the entertaining one was the one that appeared on our homepage because of the lookup. The top 10 lookups appear on the homepage and they're refreshed every 30 seconds. There was one day where you had Hodge, Lodge, Dodge, Pod, they were all, and so that if you were just getting your coffee and going to the Wordle, you had a little clue. By percentage, the biggest one was Loamy, 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 and that was 4.5 million% over year over its previous year. And another one was Voila, and those were for Quordle, the 4-way Wordle, 4-way game. And so, yeah, there's no question every day in the data we saw the 5-letter words. That was a huge thing. And you're right, it's terrific that people are having fun. And yes, dictionaries are getting traffic, which I think is great too.
Peter mentioned Quordle. Of course, we have all of these Wordle spin-offs. And for the American Dialect Society, we actually recognize that the suffix dul, DLE, won as our digital word of the year, because, of course, if you see Foodle or hurdle or absurdal.
Hurdle. I love hurdle.
Everybody has their own dull game. And it's interesting because it all comes from the creator of Wordle, whose name is Josh Wardle, Wardle, called his game Wordle. And that took off. And now this, end of his name is now a suffix that you see all over the place for all these different games.
I see that that was one that you had a tiebreaker vote, though, or it wasn't a clear. I would think the DLE suffix would be a clear winner, but it had a tough vote with touch grass.
That's right. Touch grass, meaning like if you're spending too much time online, then you should go outside and touch grass. That's sort of an antidote to that. And that got some, for digital word of the year, people like the idea of sort of pushing against our chronically online habits.
Right. And so Ben, you were involved with Fiona with Oxford's word of the year, and Oxford did it a little differently. This year chose 3 words of the year and had people vote on them. And I think did you write in support of one of those, Ben, as I recall?
I did. I might have put my thumb on the scale a little bit. Fiona and the other folks at Oxford asked me to take part in their rollout, where for the first time, as Fiona can tell us, there were 3 choices. And I came out strong in favor of one of them that ended up winning, but I'll let Fiona tell.
Yeah, just as Ben says, we decided to open it up to the public this year. I mean, that's not a new thing. Other people do that as well, but it was the first time we'd certainly done it. But it wasn't a completely free vote. We had 3 candidates: Goblin Mode, hashtag I stand with, and the other was Metaverse. And we had an event where we each. Well, I mean, maybe Ben feels that he was speaking in favor of one. I think we wanted to be very neutral and just say, here's some information about it. Here's the data that we found. Here's the information we got on our corpus. Our choice isn't about lookups in our dictionaries. It's about what our corpus, I think it's something like 18 billion words. What trends were we seeing in that? What keywords we're seeing each month as being the things people are talking about that's seen an increase, from the year before. And each of those 3 choices had seen an increase in usage at some point during the year. So all said something about the year that we just had. And we each introduced them, said a few words about them all, and then put it to a vote. And Well, I think maybe we can say, Ben, you must have spoken really eloquently on it, because Goblin Mode was the absolute, well, runaway. I don't even think does it justice. It was by far the most popular choice, which I don't think is necessarily that surprising. I think the whole idea of Goblin Mode, you know, that that behavior that's self-indulgently, slovenly, and that kind of thing, I think it spoke to what people could see about what's happened in the last couple of years. It was something, behavior, you know, that we maybe embraced and learned in lockdown. We weren't going out, or out, as we say in the UK. So it didn't really matter whether we'd done our hair, put our makeup on, what we were wearing. And then once we were able to go out, then maybe I think we saw, well, this is quite a good way of railing against that whole perfectly curated look that we see on social media. It's unattainable anyway, and it's too much hassle. So maybe we'll keep a bit of this back. So I think that's when we'll reclaim our Goblin Mode. And I think that's maybe what you know, interested people about it. It's probably also the most light-hearted out of the three of them. And, you know, who doesn't like a light-hearted word, especially when we're all living in a constant poly crisis. So
right. We've had a few years of sort of words that capture the zeitgeist, as Mignon said, is in her brackets, is some of them have been kind of disturbing for the past few years. So that's a fun one.
Sorry.
I just wanted to ask, is that a British English, more of a UK English thing, Goblin Mode? Because it was new to me when I first saw it.
I don't think necessarily. I mean, maybe others can speak to it more. I don't think it was a particularly British thing, or a UK or US. I think it was maybe just something. You get this a lot though, don't you? When you pick a word that's familiar for Word of the Year, people will often say something like, "Oh, but I know what that is. I've heard of that. How can that be Word of the Year?" And then when you pick something that people say, "Well, I've never heard of that. How can that be Word of the Year?" So it's quite hard to win. But I think maybe people recognise the behaviour rather than necessarily had been aware that that's what people were calling it. But it definitely saw the usage.
I think I'd call it an internetism. I mean, it's the kind of thing that I wouldn't consider for my own US UK thing, because they come up on the internet and they're everywhere, but they're also in very specific pockets. Yeah. So I had never heard of it before it, you know, was Word of the Year.
Yeah, so. Not to deny Ben's, eloquence, but Elon Musk tweeted this word one time. That's why it won.
Oh,
well, I'm not gonna let Elon take the credit for this one.
I'm not gonna say anything.
There was a. He did do that.
To use another word that was nominated, you know, his dick riders pushed it over the edge.
You can call that a proper internetism. You know, on our side of the pond, permacrisis was exciting because it did strike us as a distinctly more UK term than we saw here in the US. Goblin Mode struck us as that sort of grand language equalizer now of how social media drives so much language change. So it's interesting to see this rich array of experiences, emotions, and language in our selections and what's prominent and relevant.
Yeah. Well, Mark, let me ask you, in Australia now, in Australia, the words are very often, not what we expect or what we've heard, in the media here, but well, tell us the American National Dictionary Center's choice.
Oh, the Australian. Well, we chose teal, and we chose the color teal. And for us, it's quite easy. We choose an Australianism. So it's significant here, or it originates here. And teal was used as an adjective here to refer to independent candidates that took on the establishment, really, the ruling Conservative government, and won quite a lot of seats. And so what we see with teal is that not only is it an adjective, but it's also used in various combinations: teal revolution, teal bath as a combination of bloodbath. So these teal, mainly women candidates, won all these seats in the Australian Parliament this year. And we also refer to them as teals. So we've got a noun and an adjective as well as a combining form. So it was very productive. And unlike most years with our words, it was one word because people don't like it when it's two words, because then it's not a word of the year at all. And also people were familiar with it as well. Although people did point out that it's been a word around for a very long time, but
it's not a new word, obviously. Yeah.
It's a new sense. So, and it was very, we think it's got legs here, and it looks like it'll be quite significant for a few years to come because of the political landscape here in Australia and what's happening in the conservative movement here in Australia. It sort of parallels to MAGA, the MAGA movement in America and other conservatives, but it's hard to tell if there's too much of a similarity here, but that's why we chose teal, very, very popular here this year.
Okay.
So I had a question for Mark, because I'm not up with my Australian politics. Is the idea that teal is like what you get when you combine the green from the environmentalists and blue from, I guess, blue's associated with the liberals? Is that the idea, that it's like blending the colors gets you to teal?
Definitely, yeah. It was the conservative. We have the blue Conservative Party, which are called the liberal, which are called liberals here, which is quite different for American audience. Yes, it is that colour, and interestingly, most of the candidates, or not most, but a few of the candidates didn't wear this teal colour on their shirts and in their promotions. But I mean, essentially, it's a shorthand term for a political movement, and one that was quite interesting here, and well known amongst the general population, which is quite not often the case of word of the year. Sometimes it's more a niche area. Perhaps Goblin Mo wouldn't be known to a lot of the older generation, for example. So it was quite it sort of fell in our laps this year. Yeah.
So the speaking of legs, and that's one thing I wonder. The American Dialect Society sometimes chooses a word that clearly has legs and lasting power, and sometimes I wonder if it's sort of a fairly narrow. So the first time I heard the suffix "ussy" was when Kelly was on the show a few months ago, and she mentioned it, and I said, "What is that?" And I said, "Explain it to me." And she said, Google it. So now she's back. We'll put her on the spot. Explain the American Dialect Society word of the year.
It's anything with a hole. That's the polite way to explain it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So boy plus the female birthing hole.
You can say it. We're okay. No FCC.
So boy pussy, your throat hole, thrusty, right? Okay, so that gets extended to anything with a hole. Just imagine all apertures. A donut, donussy. And then it's just playful, right? Because vowels, I mean, essentially go crazy.
So I had not heard it, and I've read TikTok. Is that sort of where we see this?
Perhaps, I mean, today, yes. You can see it on TikTok, Reddit, Instagram, all memes.
Okay.
Most of the internet, right? But I originally perhaps Grindr was maybe, and drag culture and other spaces where people were talking playfully and sexually about their parts. In a good way, in a fun way, in a nice way. Yeah.
It's interesting what Mark was saying, though, in that teal had the great advantage of being one word, because I was going to say, brave to choose something that it's not even one word, it's a suffix, given the grief we get when, it's a two-word thing, it can't be that. So, that was a brave move, regardless of anything else, I think.
Well, for word of the year for the American Dialect Society, affixes are welcome. E, the prefix E was word of the year way back in 1998. And of course, we already mentioned dull. Dull and pussy are interesting examples of what the linguist Arnold Zwicky calls lib fixes. So these are actually, you know, we often blend words together by taking a part of one word and a part of another word. But then over time, that blend component can start to become productive on its own. So dull obviously begets all these Wordle spin-offs. OC is about as productive as you can get because people just, you know, especially this past year or so, have had fun with just attaching it to pretty much any word. And so just the kind of innovative affixation that's going on here, people are really kind of, you know, leaning into that and just taking it in totally crazy directions. So I think that appealed to the linguists, the fact that it shows something really interesting about the way that people latch on to new word forms and make it their own. And when we made the announcement that it was the American Dialect Society Word of the Year, there was a lot of surprise, not just from people who were unfamiliar with it, but people who were very familiar with it and had been using it a lot. We're taken aback that the American Dialect Society would call this their Word of the Year. And just the mild-mannered tweet that we put out linking to the press release over the weekend went completely viral, far beyond, orders of magnitude beyond anything that the ADS had ever put out, where that tweet has just tens of thousands of retweets and likes, and everyone kind of, you know, a lot of people sort of claiming credit because all these different subcultures had been participating in what we now call ossification. And so everyone was like, we did it. You know, people who were doing this over the course of the past year or so took great pride in the fact that they contributed to this new linguistic phenomenon.
Hey, does it have legs?
Does it have legs? Well, time will tell, but we shall see. Yeah, that I can't predict, but I mean, just you know, the fact that that it's taken off in so many different of these sort of online communities. Granted, maybe not so much for people who are not, you know, chronically online, like we were talking before about Goblin Mode, for instance. There'd be kind of a divide of people who don't know it at all versus people who know it very, very well. So we'll see. But I mean, I think that, again, because of the amazing productivity of all of these OC forms, that speaks well to its continued life in the future.
Yeah, it did. As you were saying that, it occurred to me that maybe the American Dialect Society choosing it will just completely destroy it. And
well, that could very well be. Kelly can say. I mean, we're very good at killing things by like bringing attention to them. It's like, oh, that's it for that one. We're done.
There's a good chance that the form Societussi might not have existed if we hadn't, you know. So we've certainly created new forms in the last 48 hours by doing this. But we'll see if it is short-lived or not.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to gaslighting, which was Merriam-Webster's choice this year. Peter, can you tell us how that came about?
Well, I mean, often because we're looking at our dictionary data, we see words that have spikes that connect to a particular story, and that's obviously true for words like pandemic and vaccine. And we had other words kind of in our top 10 that we can associate right away with the news: Omicron, oligarch for the Ukrainian war, codify for Roe v. Wade, sentient for the Google engineer who claimed that AI was sentient.
Oh yeah,
sentient's a good example of a word that people just have to look up anyway. That you know, how do you pronounce it? How do you spell it? And raid, and often when a word that's a common word is used in kind of a legal or specific context, raid for the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. So there were certain words that were connected, and often we have kind of these tentpole words. But in this case, this year, we had a word that was under the radar for me, kind of hovering in our top 30, 40 lookups every day of the last year, was gaslighting. And it's a good example of a word that people do have to look up. It's not self-evident, you know. If you haven't encountered it before,
right,
it can be quite confusing. And it's a word that had been on a steep rise. If people who use corpus search, if ever you go to, for example, the the COCA, the Corpus of Contemporary American English, for example, and look at this word and its pattern of search, you'll notice that it had a meteoric rise in 2017. It just suddenly jumped up into the consciousness right after it was used by Teen Vogue in a headline. The headline being "Donald Trump is gaslighting America," and that was in December of 2016, after the election, but before he took office. And that word, that article went viral. The word started, of course, it helps if a word is a favorite among journalists. It's a word that was used in many headlines and many stories, but it's also, interestingly, a word that is used by the right as much as the left. And it's also a word that is used in the private sphere as much as in the public sphere. You know, my boyfriend was gaslighting me, or medical gaslighting, would be very private, but also these very public, very political, typically uses. Not just political, a lot of corporate use, oil company gaslighting with their, with their pollution records or whatever. So what we found was this is a word that year over year, what we do is we look at year over year data. We remove what we call evergreen words that as Wendy knows, that are looked up and John knows, that are looked up year in and year out, that really don't tell us anything about the past 12 months. And once we've removed those words, we saw a real sort of sudden increase in interest in this one word, and it was gratifyingly kind of easy. It was so far above the others for us in that category, and again, gratifyingly sort of so political that it's apolitical. That it's used by both sides. It's not an accusation nor a diagnosis for any one group. It's just simply a word given the instability of information with which we all are now familiar. It's a useful term. English has a lot of synonyms for lying, but this one, this idea of a strategy and a long-term, a kind of a long game for personal or political gain. It seems like this is a word for our time. Sadly, we live in an age of doubt.
Mm-hmm. So it's just one thing that always strikes me. That I saw gaslighting when it came out, and I saw that's a great word. I've seen it more. It does seem to have broadened its meaning. I didn't know it went back to 2016, but into, away from like personal relationships into more political and other arenas. But I always think, well, okay, when dictionary.com comes out with the word of the year, are they going to top that? Or, is there, John, do you look at that and say, oh man, we were going to do gaslighting, let's do something else? Or
we're all friends and colleagues here.
We're all friends.
Just put it there.
That's why I'm wondering if you're two close friends.
I think each dictionary has similar but distinct approaches. And I think there is a lot of shared DNA in terms of what we're looking for. And so I think it's interesting to see what our users are looking up on dictionary.com, which overlaps a great deal with the other dictionaries, but there is something different. And so each dictionary, I think, is just telling related but distinct stories about just how urgent language is right now, about how messy it is, and how we're all more attuned to topics of language and negotiating our lived experiences, especially through social media, through language. So to me, we absolutely take, to the extent possible, approaches that are distinct for our collective, our distinctive brands, but also this is a larger effort about what does it mean to be monitoring language change in 2023. And I think this year, for our words of the year, look at the array of words that we had. We had a wide array of words, some which had a little bit more seriousness, some which were more zeitgeisty, some which were a little bit more fun. The last couple of years, we had a great deal of alignment around vaccination, around the pandemic. Right. And I think this shows that our society is kind of, as measured through language and language change and how we're talking about language, perhaps coming out of a moment, and maybe re-embracing some things as we re-enter. That's part of the message of Goblin Mode, maybe reconsidering some aspects where the pandemic and politics aren't dictating and dominating absolutely everything. So this year's, list of words of the year was a really exciting one for us to see, because it really got us back to look at this rich array of language change that we have going on in our society right now.
So let's not leave everybody waiting. What was dictionary.com's word of the year and why?
We chose the word woman, a 5-letter word as it happens, as our word of the year. When we also begin with data, and we look at our data, we saw almost immediately that lookups for the word woman spike significantly at key moments throughout the year, and year over year sustained significant increases in lookups on our site. And that's significant because that indicates what people are looking up in our dictionary. And then, as all of us as dictionaries do, we go, well, why are people doing this? And, it wasn't hard to see that this year, not just the topic of women, but the very definition of the term woman was front and center in so many consequential moments in our society. And furthermore, how we define words, who we include in them, and how we consider definitions. Our selection of a word like woman shows how the meaning of words, the definition of words, can have very real lived consequences for people. So for our particular lookup, the data was there, that sort of cultural touchstone moment was there. And for us, it really was inseparable for what, happened in our dictionary last year, as well as in culture last year. And that's, one of the reasons why we chose woman as our word of the year.
And at first blush, you don't realize, but if you realize the reasoning behind it, like gaslighting, I think it was a very political word this year.
Definitely a very political word this year. And it goes to show that, we in the business of dictionaries are in very serious work, right? We are increasingly lightning rods. We're increasingly weaponized left and right. And so it goes to show that, the issues of our day are really being negotiated through topics of language. So the work that we do, this year, we definitely it looks like we all had some moments for fun and brightness, which was much needed. But we also, can't forget that in society right now, the meaning of words are more powerful and consequential than ever. And, just as it can be exciting when a new word breaks through as a word of the year, such as Ussy or goblin mode, it's also very powerful to step back and look at what is happening when a word such as woman breaks through, right? What does it mean when a word that is so fundamental to our vocabulary, that is so ancient, in our written record, that is a core part of a word that anyone who speaks or learns this language knows? What does it mean when people are looking up a word like that? It's a mirror to what's going on in our society.
Mm-hmm. And the debate about the definition of woman was something that we saw in the UK as well. It wasn't just an American thing. Was Wendy? Did you notice?
Yeah, what happened? And I swear we didn't plan this, John. Honest, we did not mean to steal your thunder. Some haters found we added new definitions for many words to do with gender and sexuality. It was the result of almost 2 years worth of work that we did on a whole set of entries on the site, and we released them in October. And it included a second definition of man, a second definition of woman that accounts for the trans identity, right? And some haters in like the middle of the night on right-wing media on the December, like around the 8th, something like that, found the second definition, tweeted it as if we were the only definition, and said that Cambridge had changed what it meant to be a woman. And it went crazy viral. We had to shut down our social media commenting. We had open letters from peers of the realm writing to the Times of London because they didn't like live as a woman, in the definition. We had somebody get in through the piracy reporting saying, surely you've been hacked, right? I have a Freedom of Information Act demand for the evidence that we have in our usage note for the entry for female because of all of this. So, I mean, you couldn't have been more spot on, John, with the choice of spotting that it was time to capture that the meaning has actually expanded. it was time to account for that. If you're going to be an active live dictionary, you've got to stay on top of the existing words and not just the new ones, right? And but our publicity people were going to dictionary.com suddenly changed their word of the it took them months, just like remember, it took us a long time to choose this, took them a long time. They must be, I'm hoping that they are actually getting more attention as, maybe this will help them because we're not competing here. We're just trying to, we're still surviving as dictionaries, which is kind of astonishing right now. And we want to be able to still speak to the culture,
Right. We don't have, there are dictionaries out there, American Heritage, Webster's New World that aren't here because they don't have active staffs. They're not, there's no word of the year selection. But what John said is really interesting that, it can be, it's not all this quiet academic stuff. Dictionary editors, lexicographers are part of the culture and part of the culture wars, right? Peter,
yes.
you've had that at Merriam-Webster for sure.
Well, Peter, you I'm sure you remember I don't know, because you're younger than me, the late 90s. I think you're when we had fax campaigns, coming through, shutting us down when I was at Random House, over certain slurs, so this goes way back. Yeah.
Also, I also remember our administrative staff and even marketing, just taking calls all day, and leaving work crying, just being attacked.
Vicious. Yeah. We had threats. We had this latest thing has been pretty ugly for Cambridge, but thankfully, the organization has stood by us, but people were writing the CEO.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for doing what you're doing. Right. So we've gone through, I think this has been very efficient. We got through all the main words of the year, I think, unless I've forgotten some. But let me
hear from Lynne on the other direction across the Atlantic.
We haven't heard from Lynne. We haven't heard from Mignon yet. So yeah, Lynne, I don't want to slip away from that. You gave us Homer as the American to British English crossover. What crossed back over the other way?
Well, what I had was, and I should say, I don't count among the major ones. So thank you for throwing
major diction. Well,
but I am a big WOTY fan. The one that I did for UK to US was nominated by one of my readers, and that was fit in the meaning sexy or attractive. And I chose that one because I was aware of it from having teenage 20-something nieces and nephews in America, that Love Island is a big phenomenon over there as well as over here. And so a lot of UK young slang has sort of made its way there. I a little bit regret not choosing banter instead, but fit was the one I chose, because I have heard that since choosing fit, I've been hearing more banter from Americans.
Banter doesn't seem to me to be a British English word.
Well, it is in a British English sense, like somebody's got a lot of banter, somebody's got good banter.
Got it.
So a little bit, but it's one of those words that's come over with Love Island. And so and again, I choose these things so that people can yell at me, and I've had it on both words this year, I've never heard anybody say that. I've never heard anybody use that, but that's not really the point. The point is, what can we see as some development in the British-American linguistic relationship this year? And Love Island was a big phenomenon in one direction, and Wordle was another big phenomenon in the other direction.
So in the word of the year vote, which we were talking before the show, wasn't streamed. The last couple of years it was streamed, and we could all participate in the madness that is the word of the year, because it's like a town hall New England town hall meeting where everybody just gets up and speaks, for this word or that word, and there's a debate, and there's a vote, and then you move on in many different categories. In the final, the USI suffix won with 108 votes, and there was nothing even close. I mean, some of them were close votes. So that was clearly, that struck a nerve. But Slava Ukraini, I'm sure I pronounce it, was number 2 with just 25 votes.
Actually, I think that quiet quitting was number 2.
Yeah.
Did I look at that wrong?
32 votes for quiet quitting.
Yes, you're right. 32 votes for quiet quitting. But both of those words, I know that I remember Mignon said someplace, I don't remember where it was, that you were kind of secretly hoping that Slava Ukraini would be the one, but the brackets didn't work out that way, right?
No, it made it to, I think, the third round. I think the final word among my voters was inflation, and it came down to quiet quitting and inflation. Inflation won by 6.5%. What I think was most interesting about my brackets is how different they were on different platforms. So the voters on LinkedIn almost always, like probably about half the time, voted differently from the voters on Mastodon. And the LinkedIn people voted in such bigger numbers that they swamped out the vote. We had about 3,000 voters total, and often like 2,500 of those were from LinkedIn. So it was kind of LinkedIn, and the LinkedIn people favored, not surprisingly, words about work, the economy, anything along those lines. And so I think that's why the final 2 ended up being quiet quitting and inflation, is because LinkedIn picked those. But I thought the arguments were particularly interesting. So people thought that quiet quitting was a particularly American phenomenon, that, in Europe, when you have 2 months of vacation, you're maybe not as inclined to quiet quit as you are in America, where people feel more like they're worked to death. And people felt that inflation was a more global phenomenon than quiet quitting. So that came up. And then there was a contingent, obviously, that thought quiet quitting as 2 words didn't count, that we always hear that. And then that quiet quitting isn't a real thing was another objection, that, it means just doing the minimum required of you at work. And there's a large contingent of people who think, well, that's what's required of you at work. That's not quiet quitting. That's just doing your job. And so they object to the concept as a whole of quiet quitting. So it was interesting, because I think my Mastodon audience is more international, which I thought would have led them to choose inflation, but they actually chose quiet quitting. I think because there's more of sort of an anti-capitalist bent there. And I think that ended up driving the vote, but it was close almost everywhere.
We had inflation and quiet quitting on our short list, and we highlighted inflation largely because it's kind of an interesting word that does sum up the experience, but we saw, kind of like USI, it was productive in terms of dashflation as a sort of libfix or a combining form, shrinkflation, skimflation, greedflation, stagflation. So sort of had a productivity there. And quiet quitting, we also highlighted, and I'm sure your LinkedIn community can speak to this as well, is, just as Goblin Mode sort of speaks to how we're mediating so much of our language and experiencing it through social media, we felt that it's really interesting to see how our relationship to work is, like technology, like identity, at the forefront of a lot of paradigm shifts in language. And so anti-work and lie flat and things like that are breaking through. And how long are they going to stick around? We don't know. But this year, quiet quitting did something that was different than, say, the Great Resignation. It captured something in a term that was novel. And so we share inflation and quiet quitting in terms of some of the language trends.
Yeah, and yesterday in the podcast, I referenced the conversation you and I had about lie flat as part of the trend of quiet quitting.
Our publicist also really lobbied for us to use. Is it too late to change? Could we do quiet quitting instead of home?
Oh, really?
He really wanted to.
So that's a UK thing too, then, as a concept.
Yeah, well, he certainly
Yeah.
knew it. He's,
Yeah.
British guy. And I had to say, well, you're new to the company. Now I know you want to get involved earlier in our selection process, but the ship sailed, man. I'm telling you what we chose, not asking you for your opinion about it.
So how about in Australia, Mark? Quiet quitting, is there a?
Yeah, we actually had that on our short list.
Oh, really?
As an international word. But we've got older words, actually. I've been from the union movement here in Australia. We've got work to rule and government stroke, which have been around since the 19th century. That mean essentially the same thing, to work the absolute minimum.
Yeah, I remember work to the rule from union days.
Yes.
Yeah, but what was the other? I'm sorry, what was the other? Government
stroke, which is a term that goes back to our convict period, to our penal settlement, which was essentially the convicts not doing much, and now it's usually used of the public service doing the very minimal. While
And it's stroke, not strike?
No, stroke, government stroke.
Interesting.
Okay, we'll have to, everyone's going to get, all the lexicographers are going to go research this now after the show. Mignon, you said yesterday, did your podcast drop today or yesterday?
Last night.
Last night for the, so we can check that out. And
Yeah.
were there any other surprises? You said they were close votes. So anything you were rooting for other than Slava Ukraini?
I wanted something pandemic related to win because, Omicron or long COVID or something like that were also my favorites. Polarized was a sort of late, made it almost to the end, and I favored that. I think the other interesting thing that I found is that when people could see how other people voted, it affected the vote. That when in the early voting, I had people vote on my Instagram Reels and TikToks, and I just had them leave the vote in the comments so everyone could see how everyone else was voting. And it seemed like once one took the lead, everyone would pile on. People wanted to be associated with the winner, or they were convinced by what they saw everyone else voting. And so I switched to voting where people couldn't see how other people were voting whenever that was possible. I think it's interesting. My editor wants to do ranked choice voting next year, so I think it'll be interesting to see how it differs from the bracket. We'll get started a little earlier next year. This year it was very like a last minute, oh hey, let's just do this kind of thing. So we'll plan for it better next year.
Well, it's good to know you're going to do it next year again. Let me, we've got a few minutes left. Let me go through some of the other words that were, we can go through the American Dialect Society list of alternate words, but I'm just going to throw a few words out that maybe were captured in different places. One is, I think Oxford and American Dialect Society both had metaverse, and with American Dialect Society, it was another suffix, verse. Right. So
yeah, well, we did that just so that we could sort of combine metaverse with Fediverse, which is the federated servers of Mastodon for people who were giving up on Twitter and moving over to Mastodon, trying to figure out the Fediverse. So we kind of put those together, verse being used for online worlds these days.
There's kind of some anti Facebook bent to the word metaverse, though. I think people react strongly to that.
Yeah, my son was like, "No, don't pick this." Like he was very anti-metaverse. He didn't want any light put on that.
It's one of the highlights of something I missed again. Ben's son is always an influencer at the town hall.
The voice of Gen Z. Yeah.
Another one I stand with was both American Dialect Society and Oxford. That was one of the three, right, Fiona?
Yeah, that's right. That was the one that I'm speaking about. It was interesting because we actually chose hashtag I stand with rather than I stand with. And what I think part of the reason we wanted to choose that and put that one forward was it really spoke to the fact that, as well as it being something which people are using to show solidarity, and it's kind of a bit of easy to denounce as slacktivism, because it's not too difficult just to hashtag I stand with and we most noticeably saw Ukraine, that hashtag in March, not unsurprisingly. But it also was a really good way of showing the factions that the world is still kind of emerging and putting themselves into, because, you know, for every hashtag I support X, there was a hashtag I support Y, and often they're polar opposites. And in fact, you'd see them sort of trending that way as well. So it seemed like a good way of demonstrating one aspect of the world. It's capturing something of society and the year that we've had.
The American Dialect Society also had hashtag I Stand With X as a nominee in a newly created category. We like to sometimes just create ad hoc categories on the fly. And so we had a category of phrasal template or snow clone of the year. For those of you who follow language wise, you may know about the snow clone, where like with I Stand With X, it's like, you know, it's a template and you can fill the slot with whatever you want. And so we had various snow clones or phrasal templates that we wanted to recognize, like X hits different. It's the X for me. And the one that ended up winning is kind of interesting because it's not X, which is this kind of ironic framing device that we see a lot of. It's like not so-and-so doing such and such, as a kind of a mock horror or incredulity. And that was what ended up winning that new category.
And Ben says, like, we just like to throw them out there, but it's actually rather purposed. So we get our nominees, and the nominees, the patterns in those terms that are nominated determine our wild card categories. So we don't have an emoji of the year category every year. It's very popular, but it's only when, you know, there's new emojis or a lot of people are nominating them. That's how we got to USI as, you know, our word of the year, because there were a lot of combining forms that were nominated. We had pandemic related terms for the last several years because there were a lot nominated, but this year we only got 2 nominees for long COVID and 2 for bivalent out of, you know, all of the terms that were nominated, the many hundreds of terms. So a total. So it is, and to what Mignon was saying about like all of these people from LinkedIn being in the business community and things like that, many of the people who chose to share their information because it was optional with us were high school students. So we had a lot of younger folks who participated in our surveys. So, you know, although it was open to many people and we shared it with lots and lots of communities, the people who chose to nominate in our group were younger folks. So we got a lot of younger words in our sample.
Another example of that, not just OC, but also Riz was very popular among the younger folks who were submitting words. So Riz, which is kind of a clipping of charisma, spelled R-I-Z-Z, really took off in the past year to refer to effortless attractiveness or style, and or seductive drawing power. Yes, potential. Seducing power. Riz.
That's one that kind of has some of those hallmarks of, you know, classic slang.
Oh, Riz is great.
Zaddy has lots of Riz.
I have a question though about capturing, you know, and Fiona, this is for you. If you've got something like hashtag I Stand With, you know, ADS doesn't have a dictionary that it publishes, but the OED is a dictionary. And one of the things that we have to do, this is like self-imposed rules, but we want people to be able to go to the website and look up the word if we're choosing a word of the year, right? So how do you account for something like hashtag I Stand With in the OED? Just really interested, or is that something that doesn't matter for you in the word of the year? It's like divorced from that. I'm really curious.
I think it is, because as you say, if someone goes to the OED and looks up hashtag I Stand With, they're not going to find anything because it doesn't exist as an entry. To stand with, as a phrasal verb, obviously does. But it's, I think because we base our choices on word of the year, so okay, this year it was a vote, but in the past, it's not based on lookups, it's not based on things that people are looking up. It means that it gives us, I suppose, a bit more freedom to not necessarily stick to something that would have to be looked up in the dictionary. I mean, you all may remember in 2015, we chose an emoji. And that's probably the epitome of something that you can't look up especially in the OED I'm sure people would, that's how, you know, they view it as kind of something completely separate from emojis and that kind of thing. So yeah, it is something that we view as different. So therefore it gave us a freedom. But one thing that's quite interesting is we're seeing a little bit of lexicalization of hashtag I stand with. And we're seeing some examples of things like, oh, I'm fed up of the hashtag I stand with mob, or hashtag I stand with are really annoying. It's probably going to be ephemeral, but maybe it's not going to have those legs. But again, I think we all know none of us are ever going to try and second guess the way language is going to go, because that's just foolish thing to do. But that also another great thing about Word of the Year, it doesn't have to have legs. It doesn't have to stick around. It doesn't have to be, you know, something which someone's going to be talking about in 5 years' time, never mind longer. It's saying something about now. And so they're just equally as valid as John was saying, a word like woman being around for how long? You know, so that's the beauty of it. And I think the choices that we've all had is exactly what John said. It's just showing it's amazing diversity in choice, really.
Yeah. So Word of the Year has different meanings to different people, different organizations. That's why people get upset about it. But it's interesting to look at all these words and sort of consider what that said about the culture in our times.
I just wanted to interject. We opened our Word of the Year event with a little tribute to Alan Metcalf, who passed away in February of last year. He's the reason we're doing this. He's the reason we're all doing this Word of the Year thing. He was the one who came up with the idea in 1990 that the American Dialect Society should pick a Word of the Year on the model of Time picking a Person of the Year. He thought it would be a fun, lighthearted way to attract attention to what members of the ADS were doing. And it was hugely successful, so much so that it spawned all of these other WODIs that we're talking about. And so I opened with a tribute to Alan, and I feel like always his spirit is kind of lingering over us whenever we do our WODI discussions.
Yeah, nice.
You're here.
I'm gonna two more things. We have a poll that slipped my mind. We wanted to ask people in the room today. We got dozens of you here, so it's great. A poll of all the words of the year that was those that we've talked about, and we'll let you decide. Heather, are you got the poll? Okay, I don't always see it. Is the poll up?
Do you want us to recuse ourselves, or should we?
No, John, go ahead, vote, because it actually does lead to
the answer.
this. Oh, there it is. It just popped up. Okay, that leads to my final question for each of you, and I want to ask each of you individually, what word did you feel most captured the zeitgeist, or what word did you think speaks to the year 2022? And of course, I'm going to ask you not to choose the word that your organization picked. So I'll go in order from on my screen. Wendalyn, Wendy, what do you think? What's the word of the year that you like personally?
Well, I'm kind of intrigued by this Ussy business, because I've been living under a rock and it's totally new to me.
Yeah. All right.
So I'm going to go investigate that one.
Okay, well, if I'm going not let's pick my own. I'm going to go with teal, because I first heard about it in a politics podcast that I've been listening to, and they were talking about that a lot, and that's the first time I'd heard of it. This a few months ago, so I'm really intrigued by it. I like the etymology idea. I like the fact that it's a lot of women leading it. I think that's fascinating. So I'm going with teal.
All right. And speaking of teal, Mark?
I'd go for woman. I think there's quite a few words that are coming in politics from America that have entered the political debate in Australia, and quite some nasty divisive stuff and language related to women, but also words to do with the trans movement, and all. Yeah, so quite a lot of words there. That pronouns, for example, those kinds of terms are coming in. I think woman. I think that captures something of that whole zeitgeist.
Mm-hmm. Ben.
Well, I got to say, Goblin Mode, just from the other ones, it was so much fun to be part of the Oxford, rollout of their selections that people could vote for. I ended up writing a column for the Wall Street Journal about Goblin Mode. I really liked it a lot, even though it didn't end up figuring in the American Dialect Society choices. I think, with ADS, since we're the last ones of the WOTY season, often I think people think, well, that's been done. Oxford did Goblin Mode. We don't need to give it more recognition than it already has. But I still have a soft spot in my heart for that one.
All right. And Lynn.
I think I'd go with woman, not just because it's got a new definition, but also because it was a very big year in terms of Supreme Court decisions and other things affecting women.
I have one more question for you. You have, I know I've been following that you've been tweeting, and in your newsletter you talk about words of the year, and including a bunch of non-English words. Do you have a favorite non-English word of the year?
Yeah, I shared that in the chat. So my favorite one is from Japanese, taipa. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but what's interesting about it to me is, number one, it sums up something really important in my life: time performance. Are you using your time well? And I'm a little bit obsessed with that. But also, it's from the Japanese time performance, which is the Japaneseification of the English phrase time performance, and then it's shortened into taipa, and I want to bring it back into English from Japanese as taipa and talk about it all the time. So yeah,
that's a great one. Okay, Kelly.
I have to go with woman. I for those of you who maybe saw my video, I nominated Women, Life, Freedom, and so I think it is representative of my linguistic experiences of 2022 for a number of reasons. So that's the one I have to choose.
Okay, Mignon.
Of the ones in the poll, I would choose, I think, Goblin Mode, because I find it to be so useful and so representative of the year. I think it has a lot of staying power, and I like it because it's new. So I think that would be my choice.
Okay, it doesn't have to be in the poll. Is there what about something that's not in the poll?
If it wasn't in the poll, I would choose Slava Ukraini, because I feel like the war has just has affected the world in so many ways, in so many different ways. It's one of the big causes for inflation, for example. And I think that as far as, for me, the zeitgeist of the year, that is the best representative phrase.
Okay, John?
I'm going to go with Homer as a representative of Wordle. I don't think we've seen something like Wordle, the phenomenon that was Wordle, the way it brought so many people together in a long time. And it was really exciting to see. It was really refreshing to see, something that was positive and something that was playful cut above. And it was really fascinating to see how it affected trends in the dictionary over the course of the entire year. It was just truly a data phenomenon. And it was cool to see so many people learning unusual 5-letter words like voila, foamy, and tacit. So I'm going to go with Homer for that reason.
All right. And Peter?
For me, I think I have to echo Mignon. The very notion that there is a shooting war on European soil in 2022 is something that astonishes me every single day. The term oligarch has a special usage note in Merriam-Webster in Russia and other countries that succeeded the Soviet Union, with that sense too, one of a class of individuals who through private acquisition of state assets amassed great wealth that is stored especially in foreign accounts and properties, and who typically maintain close links to the highest government circles. That's a real, the fact is it's an unusual word. It's the kind of thing that sends people to the dictionary. And I often have to say, we're not measuring the importance of the story. We're measuring the word that sent people to the dictionary about that story. And this was that word. And I think broadly speaking, that story is a big one to the extent that pandemic was a big one a couple of years ago. So it's something that's on my mind. And this is the vocabulary link to that story.
All right. All right. Heather, you want to share the results of the poll and let us know how everybody voted? So,
Gaslighting takes
Hey.
it.
Yeah.
mhm.
Stolen election.
Pardon?
I think the election was stolen, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yes, right.
Very, very good.
Poor
You
That's
Teal.
win.
certainly,
See
You
what you
win.
did
Yeah.
there, Mark. Gaslighting is another great example too, though. And Peter, I'm sure you and your team has experienced this. We all are, is, it's been around for a while. It is evolving in its vocabulary to refer to a sort of strategic side of manipulation. Dictionaries capture it. Even as we do that, we still have to add new senses and go, okay, how are people just using gaslighting when somebody's disagreeing with them? Which is an evolved sense from the strategic manipulation. If you watch, say, The Bachelorette, and you might see somebody, you're gaslighting me. Are they really talking about a campaign of lying, or do they mean, I don't like what you're saying? And this is the word that we're all now using to do that. And I think gaslighting from Merriam-Webster's choice is kind of showing that sort of sweet middle spot in word evolution that's going on.
so gaslightings are number one with a third. Woman did very well, Goblin Mode. And you wouldn't expect an internet, mainly probably American audience to go with Homer and Teal, but Ussy didn't get a whole lot of love there, got a few votes, but anyway, it's very interesting. Look at all those words. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and sticking around. I knew we wouldn't get it in an hour. Nobody really believed it, but we're glad for those of you who did stick around. Thank you, Wendy, Fiona, Mark, Ben, Lynn, Kelly, Mignon, John, Peter. Thank you to Heather and Sarani, our producers, and thank you everybody thank you for the chat, which I'm going to enjoy reading the room chat afterwards. And we will be back next month with another show, and have a great evening, everybody, or morning in Mark's case.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Heather.
Usually we have some music again here.